Wild simulated production, as you can see here in this picture, just a few plants, per square foot, growing in its natural environment. The goal is to just mimic wild conditions, the wild natural conditions that you would find ginseng growing in naturally. This method has the least inputs and labor of any of the three methods. It's the least susceptible to disease with, proper plant spacing. It does tend to be more vulnerable to poaching due to the tradition of wildcrafting roots. People come onto your land, they'll see this naturally looking ginseng, and it could be harvested by someone else. So that is a major concern. We'll talk a little bit about site security and some ways to help minimize the risk of that. Wild simulated roots are harvested. They have to be 5 years old to harvest legally, just like all the other wild regulations. But generally, you want to wait 7 to 10 years before these roots really start taking on wild characteristics. As I mentioned, the goal is to produce a root that is virtually indistinguishable from a truly wild root. So the older, the better. It's going to take on more of those wild characteristics, and it's the highest value root, compared to all the other production methods. Average $350 to $400 per dried pound. Those prices do fluctuate annually with the ginseng buying season. It's generally sold as wild. As I mentioned, the wild and wild simulated classifications earlier, they get lumped together. So wild simulated is just starting to be recognized by the regulators. There's really only a couple states that do track wild simulated. They have a certification program for wild simulated growers in West Virginia, and I do believe they track wild simulated here in Tennessee as well, but they don't have a certification program for growers to verify that they are producing wild simulated. So selecting a site for wild simulated cultivation, as I mentioned, looking for a site that would produce natural wild ginseng. If you're familiar with digging wild ginseng, I know a lot of you probably are. If you're not, you're going to look for north to east facing slopes that have good concentrations of sugar maple, poplar, beech, ash, hickory, in the overstory, spice bush, ferns, other medicinal herbs like black cohosh, golden seal, bloodroot, wild ginger. These are some good indicators as understory plants that kind of give you an indicator of what the soil pH and nutrient levels are. So you're looking for these species, and that would really help you identify a good site. These pictures are taken from my property. Got some pretty nice mature poplar here, and spice bush in the understory, some pawpaw. I don't have the best understory indicators. I got a lot of rattlesnake fern, a little bit of bloodroot and spice bush, but some of those other spring ephemerals aren't there. But it still grows good ginseng. So if the plants aren't there, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not gonna grow ginseng. But you may want to do a little soil analysis and see what your pH is and what your nutrient loads are. So other site considerations, good drainage and airflow. You want a fairly open understory, so you get good airflow. That's going to really minimize disease. When you have plants that are in a stagnant environment, especially when they're wet, a lot of ginseng pathogens are waterborne. And when the plants are in close proximity, they're touching each other, so they're transferring that disease. So having that good airflow is going to dry them out faster. It's going to help minimize that. Soil nutrients and pH. Ginseng likes a pH of 5.5 to 6, ideally. High calcium levels are desired. Ginseng is actually Ginseng's native range is very closely associated with the native range of sugar maple. Sugar maple has very good concentrations of calcium in the leaves. So when those leaves fall off in the fall and break down, it's going to be adding calcium to the soil. So you see a close correlation between those two species and the calcium levels in the soil. Some surveys have found up to 5,000 pounds per acre, or something. I think that's 5,000 pounds per acre calcium. Very high levels of calcium in the best ginseng sites.